Okay. All right, perfect. It's time to begin. Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome to the second webinar in the series. We're very excited to have you here.
Morning.
Good morning, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. If you guys could, sorry? Good morning, good morning.
Yes, good morning.
If everyone could turn on their cameras, if possible, just for this beginning part at least, while we do the introductory session and I introduce our colleagues. I'm going to take a quick picture as well for our social media post. And then while the presentation is going on, you're free to turn off your cameras if it's easier in terms of connection and stuff. So I won't take very long. I'm just going to hand over quickly to our partners, Scale for Resilience Partners Biodiversity CIAT Alliance, who will be presenting the second webinar in the series on nature-based solutions and climate resilience. We have our colleagues Andrea, Anton, Miguel, and Daisy that will be joining us later on. And before I do that, I'm going to take a quick screenshot. So if everyone could just have a big smile and look into the camera. Perfect. Okay, and with that, I'm handing it off over to our partners at Biodiversity CIAT Alliance.
Thank you, Benedict. I'm going now to share my screen. Just please let me know. Just a moment. When you can see. Yeah. So, can you see my presentation now?
Not quite. For me, it's still white, but it might be a little bit loading. I don't know for the others.
It's just showing a black screen.
Okay, so we'll do it again.
Yeah, that was perfect. We can see the presentation. It works.
You can see the full screen?
Yep.
So, okay. So, hello, everybody. Welcome to the second webinar that we have titled Introduction to Climate Resilience and Nature-Based Solutions. We are the Alliance of Biodiversity and CIAT. We are part of the CIR. I will talk about this later. So let me just very quickly introduce the agenda for today. So we are going to have 1 hour and a half where we are going basically to share our knowledge about climate resilience and nature-based solutions. So we are going to start with our welcome and introduction, then some introduction about what is climate resilience and what are nature-based solutions and all the approaches that we have been working in those topics. Then we are going to talk about the climate smart agriculture prioritization framework that in this section that we have been titled nature-based solutions as business models. And then we are going to finish the session talking about one practical example that we have it in a previous project about how scientific information have been integrated into the design of a financial services for smallholder farmers in the region. So then at the end, we are going to have a space so then you can make all your questions and then we are going to close at 11:30 in Colombia time. I know that you are in plenty places now, so you may have a different time right now. So this is the speakers that are going to be today. So we have Daisy. Daisy is a regional leader for Latin America and the Caribbean in the climate action here in the Alliance of Biodiversity and CIAT. There is Anton. He is the thematic leader for digital tools for climate action here in the Alliance of Biodiversity and CIAT. There is also Miguel. Miguel is a research specialist for climate action in the Alliance of Biodiversity and CIAT, and there is me. I'm Senior Research Associate in the Climate Action Team, also here at the Alliance of Biodiversity and CIAT. As you can see, we have different backgrounds. There is Daisy as a social scientist. There is Anton, more like from the spatial and data analysis expertise. There is Miguel as an agronomist, and I'm more related to economics and social policies. So we hope that we can give you a good webinar. So with that, let me start. As I mentioned, we are part of the CGIR. CGIR is a consortium of about 15 topic class research centers in tropical agriculture. The CIR have more than 50 years of experience of working in topic related to agriculture, is present in 89 countries and have more than 3,000 partners around the world. And in this big context of the CIR, we are the Alliance of Biodiversity and CIAT. We make mainly work in the nexus between agriculture, nutrition, and environment. We have these um, seven big topics of research that include food, environment, and consumer behavior, multifunctional landscape, agrobiodiversity, digital inclusion, improving crops, gender inclusion, and for sure, climate action. And more specific, we are framing this webinar in the work that the climate readiness team of the climate action team is doing. Basically, as in the climate readiness research topic, our main goal is to build long-term resilience against climate change by helping stakeholders to anticipate risks, develop strategies to absorb those shocks, and implement policies and investments by fostering innovation, leveraging partnerships, and scaling climate smart practices. So we have been talking a little bit about climate, climate action, climate readiness, and the title of this webinar is include climate resilience, no? So, but why climate resilience? So I made this presentation with some concepts about climate change because we have been talking a lot of these topics in the last years. We have been looking some of the effects of climate change. We have been experiencing those in our region. So it's good that we have some of the concepts to start this webinar. So climate change refers to the change in the state of the climate that can be identified, can be evident for us. And those changes in the mean and or the variability of these properties and that persist for an extended period, typically decades or longer. However, we have been experiencing that more often. No, the Framework Convention on Climate Change, the UNFCCC, defines climate change as a change of a climate which is attributed directly or indirectly to human activity that alters the composition of the global atmosphere, um, and which is in addition to natural climate variability observed over a comparable time of periods. And here is important because there is a distinction between the climate change that is attributed to human activities that is altering the atmosphere composition, and there is a climate variability that can be attributed to natural causes. So there are some pictures that you can see on how the temperature, the precipitation, the soil moisture uh, is changing. I would like you to show this kind of trend that is worrying us about how it looks. The global temperature is changing. No, is going up and up. And in this context, the IPCC is saying that we are going to experience this kind of issues. No more extreme heat that will be more frequent and intense, more heavy rainfall that also will be more frequent and intense, droughts that will increase in some of the regions, the fire weather that will be more frequent, and for sure the ocean that will be warming, acidifying, and losing oxygen. So why these kind of trends are worrying us? Because we need to ensure food security in a context of climate change. So to 2015, we will need to produce around 17% more food as our population is growing, but we are facing these kind of challenges that you are seeing in the right part of the slide. There are some news from our countries in Latin America. Sorry that they are in Spanish, but you can see that there is a lot of concern about the challenges that we are facing to produce this kind of food that we will need to support our population in the context of climate change. So with that introduction, I will give the floor to Miguel to continue with the presentation.
Great. Thank you, Andrea. I'm just going to share my screen. You can see now the slide.
Yep.
Yes.
Great. So, continuing with Andrea's context, how we will produce more food, let's say, if it is one of the key objectives. So we are. This slide is a busy slide. I hope I don't think that you can see simple sided what is happening here, because the idea is that to connect this food production, we need to consider many different elements that add a layer of complexity to the process, to that food production process. No, so here the idea is to understand a little bit all these elements that are playing in terms of the food system. No, this is a kind of diagram that show us the elements, interaction, and the dimensions. Perhaps the big picture here is that we are finding that food production is not isolated. No, it has also components that inform policies, components that are related to cultural aspects, to demographic aspects, that are related also to climate change, obviously, because it's impacting directly the food production, but also is linking with energy aspects and for sure socioeconomic elements and environmental elements that are somehow interacting to produce or to ensure food security. No, so this is a zoom in just to simplify it a little bit and understand a little bit more what I mean about the dimensions. No, so the entry point here is, for instance, the land. So climate change, all the impacts that Andrea was mentioning, can impact directly food production. And then we have two main actors here, no, farmers and consumers. So those two actors are key and essential to understand what are the interactions of that food production. Also, we have to consider transport elements, waste elements, for sure, water, energy, money, all these transactions and services that are being provided to produce food, no? So it is influenced for sure by policy and governance aspects that determine what are the actions that are needed to ensure food security, but also civil security, no? In the context, for instance, of climate migration, that's another big element here playing a role and influencing food production. But also in terms of sociocultural aspects, how science is linked to policies, but also is linked to technologies, to elements that can be scaled down or can also inform farmers, no? In the end, how we can improve the food production, the agricultural production systems to achieve our current challenges in terms of economic and environmental aspects, and also for supply, no, the food needed for in the future, no, considering that food production has been for decades our main objective, but in the process of achieving that, no, so we have realized that there is a trade-off between food production and environmental, soil, water, and other resources degradation and loss, no, including biodiversity. So this is a little bit the context of where we are operating. And to address those challenges, agriculture is also an opportunity, a big opportunity. It is the most vulnerable sector in one side, but also is one of the most, or the sector with the more potential to integrate solutions. No, so there are several approaches in terms of how we can do agriculture. So in the context of nature-based solutions, climate smart agriculture, so all these kind of ways to produce food or models, we can put them into a kind of a diagram in which we have in one hand the maximized yield scenario, no, that has been the conventional way to produce food, that is linked to industrialized processes that at some point can supply, no, that demand, food demand. But also we have the transition, or try to understand where we have um, where we have the opportunities and alternatives to improve or to compensate, no, these environmental trade-offs, economic trade-offs, trying to understand how are the natural processes, how they occur, no, what elements they have, and how they can inspire on those elements and integrate them in agricultural activities, no. So here I just put some examples of types of agriculture. For instance, in the side of the conventional side, we have conservation agriculture, precision agriculture. In the middle, let's say organic agriculture, that help us to transition to some alternative ways to produce, as agroecology, natural-based solutions, regenerative agriculture, CSA also as an approach, and many others that I'm not putting here, but that exist, no, permaculture, syntropic agriculture, and so on, no. So there are different approaches, experiences. The point here is not to say this is good, this is bad, but just to understand that there are many options or ways to understand how we are doing agriculture, and how they can complement, no, considering different scenarios that we have in mind, but having at least the horizon that we need to produce in a more sustainable way, no. So this is not to rank and to say this is good and bad. It's just to map out what we have on the table, no. So nature-based solutions, just to quickly introduce that concept, because as we see, we have a complexity. We have to condense a little bit the concepts about what we are targeting, no? So for instance, NBS is integrating somehow restoration actions related to very specific climate change impacts, no? That will also be complemented by infrastructure management activities, not only in agriculture, but also trying to link other sectors, no, to try to provide solutions, no, like as a health sector, forestry sector, and so on. So the idea here is to generate a kind of environment or a scenario where we are aware about the challenges, but also the solutions, trying to focus obviously on human well-being, trying to solve our needs, and but also don't forget and don't put aside what are the benefits for nature, no? What are the benefits for biodiversity that in the end supports all the agricultural production, for instance. So this is just a very simplified approach. The presentation just want to show some concepts, some examples in the next slides about what we mean about these concepts. And for instance, climate smart agriculture here wants to put the global discussion into practices. No, so we have adaptation in one side. We sometimes hear about mitigation, for sure, food and nutritional security, but how these elements can be integrated, what we can do in terms of try to find synergies or trade-offs between these elements. No, for instance, adaptation. So when we talk about adaptation, is try to build resilience and adaptation to climate change. So for a farmer, how this climate impacts drought, flood, how they can be prepared to absorb that impact and try to move forward after that impact has occurred. No, so there are several aspects that we can talk about that, but one entry point are the practices. No, so how we can implement some actions, tangible actions, practices that can improve not only farmer but also the farm or the agro ecosystem in a way that can be better prepared to those climate impacts. No, and mitigation also in the transition and in the process to improve that, enhance that adaptation. Try to understand what are the opportunities to reduce greenhouse gases emissions. No, and also how we can reduce reduce emission, but also capture. No, the typical example is trees. No, so this is a very efficient way to increase carbon capture in agro ecosystems, but also the soil plays an important role here. So this is how we are trying to connect those two pieces without also forgetting the food and nutritional aspect that in the end takes is the most important thing for farmers, for instance, and for anyone in the end. No, so how they are generating income based on a productivity that is that it comes from a sustainable way to produce. No, so from there we can consider many different elements. So this is in a big picture. We have to see and to understand in a local, in a global way these concepts. But climate change, climate viability are always playing a role here, and there are several opportunities to link this to also to the sustainable development goals. No, so how countries are working and trying to solve these issues based on national adaptation plans or NDCs. No, so this kind of policy, global policy that help us to 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 the countries to understand and plan some actions to solve these issues. No, so talking about these multiple scales, so this diagram just want to show that we have some enable environments actions. Not always are just tangible practices on farm. We have also to take in infrastructure, physical capital, markets and value chains, gender and social inclusion, how we are generating information, how we are sharing and analyzing this information, how climate services are integrated in this process, not only in decision making, but also on farm activities, because in the end, the idea to integrate NBS or to integrate, not to have those nature-based solutions plus climate smart agriculture CSA approaches is to integrate the climate layer. No, so what does mean a climate change and climate impacts, no, for different type of actors. No, so this also touch directly and indirectly insurance and financial services, agricultural and environmental policy frameworks. No, so all these elements are considered in this CSA MBS approach to generate that environment that can facilitate implementation of different practices at the landscape level, at the farm level, but also at the plot level. No, so there are different actors working at these different levels. No, and there are different options that can be implemented in those different levels. No, for instance, landscape level. So we talk about ecosystem services provision and regulation, cooperation networks, biodiversity and ecosystems conservation and restoration. And we can go then down to the plot level that are the scenario where farmers also are insteading or are acting in terms of soil and water conservation, using eco-friendly or sustainable, let's say, inputs or organic inputs, or there are many tags that perhaps deserves another kind of presentation to go in deep about that. But yeah, the idea is to transition on also in the kind of inputs that we are using, in the way that we are using them, and also don't forget the diversification, no, or of the farm, because that's one key element that can build the resilience, that characteristic that help them to reduce the risk of the climate change impacts. No, so there is here, for example, a list of practices that can be done in different when we see from different angles, from livestock, from agroforestry, focusing on soil and water, or in general to agriculture, also including energy and alternative energy sources, such as biogas or improved cookstoves, or when we talk about solar panel water pumps that are also have to be linked to other practices. No, so this is just an overview of some options, general options, that in the end, the other key message or important message is that they need to be recognized, identified with the stakeholders, and implemented in a very specific context. No, so we don't have silver bullet options. So we need to also to understand the context and understand also what are the solutions, but in a very specific context. No, so for that end, we have been working for decades now, trying to come up with methods, tools, and examples that can help us to understand how can be the process at the national level in terms of decision making, what are the priorities, what are the impacts of those climate change related impacts, no, and how we can address them, no, not only from the practices perspective, but also from the political and institutional aspect, the economic alternatives that we have in the end to also to have options for farmers, and there are several documents that can condense this kind of analysis in a more systematic way. No, that's one another point that we have. Considering that big food system, so we need to also to integrate systemic approaches to generate and to make actions in the elements of the systems that can bring the most potential to transition to a sustainable way to produce. And one of those actions, for instance, that I wanted to present quickly that help us to understand in a more tangible way is the climate smart villages. Is kind of an integrative approach that has been tested, piloted, and is currently ongoing, in different parts of the world. For instance, here in Latin America, in Guatemala, Colombia, and Honduras, we have had the experiences where we try to, having in mind these concepts, try to integrate with the people, with the communities, some territories or areas or spaces that can serve as a spaces to co-create knowledge with actors, not only research and farmers, but also trying to connect other actors and generate the knowledge with them, co-develop the knowledge with them, test, adopt, and evaluate the options that are suitable for their challenges and the realities, and then promote these kind of approaches, how we can integrate the CSA or natural-based solutions actions with the idea to improve their livelihoods, to make them more resilient in the face of climate change. So it's basically a kind of participatory approach in which we integrate different actors, but also we integrate different tools and practices that can give us an idea of elements that can be scaled out. What are the criteria, the important elements that can help us to scale out the solution, or the potential actions that we can do on field. So it also informs policy, but also informs the community. So talking about what practices we are talking about, so learning about how we interpret the climate information. So there are different methods, no, and ways that we integrate um, very very simple ways or a very simple language, no, something very educational that can help to people, a farmer in any place, that help them to understand what does mean precipitation and the volume of precipitation, or the high temperature, low temperature, or an average temperature. Try to make them more aware about the instruments and what those instruments are telling us. No, so if how are the patterns, for instance, in precipitation, so they can, based on that, build their cropping calendars, for instance. So this is just a quick example on how we can integrate this climate layer into decision making at the farm level. No, so it's trying to contribute to the internalization of this climate information, what this mean for farmers. No, so once we are aware, no, about, okay, climate is affecting me in this way or in this other way, so what I can do, no, so I'm now more aware about those impacts, and then and it facilitates somehow, no, how the actions, no, that I have to implement to do that. For instance, here in some pictures in the Guatemala case, in which farmers are implementing terraces that help us to reduce erosion, to reduce increase water retention, no, because we are trying to mimic, no, how the agro-ecosystems work, no, trying to integrate barriers in the contour of the mountains, no, considering the slope and other factors that can without using a huge infrastructure, no, trying to create an effect, no, on those climatic hazards, no, for instance, heavy rains, no, so you see that given the slope, so they will wash out the different the soil particles, and then the nutrients, and then soil fertility will be also compromised in the future. So these kind of practices can help to improve and improve not only soil fertility, but also in the future increase soil organic matter content and other elements that are linked to this mitigation adaptation concepts. No, also very simple actions like covers or shelters that in which we can integrate water harvesting systems, tanks, or water reservoirs are quite important, because they can provide, no, an additional source of water, no, so they allow to produce more in 1 year, for instance, in a scenario where they don't implement any practice, no, so and even take advantage of these kind of simple structures or shelters to create gardens, no, like some spaces where they also can diversify their food production and generate an additional income as well about from that space that is more resilient, let's say, to external climate variables. No, so another aspect that can be integrated here is or simple practice or technologies is irrigation systems like drip irrigation or micro sprinkle irrigation. There are different systems that can help us to make better use of water resource, is soil resources, and and in the end try to focus also on the economy of the people, so they can diversify their not only their income, but also try to reduce the risk of these climate impacts. No, so considering these practices, so this is a graphic that just show how I'm apologize because it's in Spanish, the practices here and the variables, but it all just want to show that based on the different practices that we have here, so we can based on the evaluations. I'm not going to go in detail about yield, no, what were the benefits on food and soil characteristics improvement, like water retention and so on. just wanted to see how, from the perspective of farmers, how they perceive the benefits of those practices. No, so for instance, terraces with live fences and using organic fertilizers, how they perceive that are the blue bars that they are contributing to the to increase their production. No, so we can also disaggregate by gender, but the point here is that we can also have an idea of that practices, most of the practices, this is just an example of some options, no, can improve or generate that resilience that it helps to improve production, no, and that also they are not kind of isolated solutions, no, they need to be implemented together. So it doesn't make too much sense to have a water reservoir or water harvesting if you don't complement it trying to integrate an irrigation system. Now it works, but they do synergy when we integrate new practices, like cover crops, when we do crop rotation, and when we use locally produced by pesticides or fertilizers. No, so that's the way to see in a more integral way the food production system. No, so they can also have an opportunity to diversify their income, their livelihoods, and also reduce the risk. And just to, I think this is the final slide, is to see also how thinking in food, no? So this is our connection, but there are many other connections in terms of environmental aspects. But just to show that when we implement our practices and technologies, in this case, in a very local focus, no, that is our technologies as the ones that I mentioned. So the first graphs shows the food they have to buy in a gray color and the food that they produce in green. But for people that adopt some practices and the ones that doesn't adopt the practices, no. So we see that when you don't implement any, so you need to buy more food or even any other inputs from outside, no. And then when they implement practices, this food or food that is produced in their households or in the farm, so it's increased kind of even at 30%. So it gives an idea of the way that we can fortify or improve food security, and also nutritional security. So this is just kind of an example on how we can help from many specific actions that in the end is one thing, important thing, no? So solutions somehow they need to be simple, but the opportunity here is also to integrate many other innovative practices, no, and actions that are important. So that give us an idea or where should we invest resources, no, not only money but also time, also processes, no, time in terms of doing decision making, what are the potential risks involved, how do I know it works. So this is condensing in all the documentation that we have generated in these kind of processes, but in the end is to generate portfolios and trying to understand negative impacts, what are the productivity potential in crop and animal systems to generate income. So this is one process that Anton perhaps will tell in the next presentation in more detail, trying to do economic analysis of the portfolios, trying to understand what is the cost of the implementation of a given practices or a given set of practices, costs and benefits, and understand the financial indicators and try to see if it is viable or not for a given type or typology of producer or technology level of producer, and also integrate and monitor an evaluation system to understand metrics and tools that we can use to adapt to monitor the results, the food security benefits or any soil or water conservation benefit, and that can be monitored, that help to facilitate the decision making, integrating also some digital tools in a sense that we can facilitate the analysis of the information that we are generating from this process, but also monitor and evaluate and project and try to take decisions in a more informed way. So I think that's it. Yeah, so I will hand over presentation to Anton. So I hope it is clear, but I think we can. I will stop to share my screen, and it's already there. Yep. So thank you very much.
Okay, so I see there is a question, but I think we leave the questions to the end, right? Yeah. Okay.
Right.
Yeah. Thank you, Miguel. I will follow what Miguel just explained. So Miguel was explaining the different concepts we use. So nature-based solutions, or climate-smart agriculture. But you can imagine that this is we as scientists, we like to have concepts, but when we talk to farmers and we talk even to the national stakeholders, we need to come up with very clear processes and very clear ways how they can select actually what is the right practice that they can implement together with farmers. So we like to have a farmer's approach of how we can select what is the right practice for farmers and how we even then make this decision in a participatory way together with stakeholders in the countries where we work. So I will show you an example of a framework that we used in several countries. It's called the Climate Smart Agriculture Prioritization Framework. It's basically a stakeholder-driven process where we work together with on a country level with stakeholders from ministries, from other institutions that are relevant for agriculture, but also with farmers together to define what is the best practice or the best package of practices they can implement. And as Miguel was just explaining, climate smart agriculture, you can imagine this is already very complex if you go to farmers, because remember just this example of agroforestry. So you need to have components that would guarantee your food and nutritional security. This can be the specific food crops that you grow in your agroforestry systems. But you also need to think about what is needed that these crops or these systems are adapted to climate hazards or to climate change in the future. And then you also need to, if possible, you also need to have ways of how you can reduce emissions on a long term. So you can do this in agroforestry systems by combining crops with trees and other ways of improving soil structures and so on. So it's very complex at the end of the day. And you can also imagine you have a very long list of possible practices that you could implement in a specific crop system. So there's a lot of choice to make, and there's a lot of people can get very quick confused about what they should actually do when they want to implement climate smart agriculture practices together with their farmers. So we came up with this framework. It's, by the way, it's also led by Miguel. It's Miguel's work, basically, this framework. So we divide it in 4 phases, because in the first phase we do a very light initial assessment of what are basically the options. So if we go to a country, we just check, so what are the main crop systems, what is the main what very long list of possible CSA practices we can come up with. So we come up with a long list of CSA practices, and we go into a second phase where we bring together stakeholders from the relevant stakeholders from ministries, agriculture, institutions, supply chains, and so on. So we bring them together, and we do together with them a workshop where we try to filter out the top options of climate smart agriculture practices that are relevant, actually. So we define it in a participatory approach together with them. And then we use this short list or this shorter list, and we go into a analytical phase where we do things like cost benefit analysis. So we really work together with experts to define, so what does it actually cost on the farm, getting the resources and the inputs from a closed store and do it actually in the farm, so it cost-benefit analysis of what is the cost of implementing it, and what are the real benefits, and not just economic benefits, so all the benefits that can come up from this CSA option. We go back with this results of cost-benefit analysis into a final workshop that we develop together with the stakeholders again a portfolio. So portfolio means you're not just implementing a single CSA option, so you combine them into useful packages. I think Miguel was also mentioning it before. So you bring them together into packages so that they are complementary, and you can have trade-offs for the different CSA pillars, like on adaptation, mitigation, and food security. So you bring them together and you come up with very few packages, or as a portfolio of a few ones that you then present to policymakers and to possible vehicles that can be used to get financing to implement these portfolios in these countries. So this is in a nutshell, the framework. And you can see on this next slide very clear. So we developed for these 3 pillars in climate smart agriculture. We developed indicators that we use to select the CSA options for a specific case, taking into account what is the situation in terms of climate hazards, what are the production systems, and then do the cost benefit analysis, look into, once we have the short list or the analyzed list, we look into barriers and opportunities together with the stakeholders that could be because of a specific policy situation, or because there is a possibility through education, or it's even if it's socio-cultural barriers, opportunities can also be a criteria for making a final decision. So what are the actually practices that we put into our portfolios? So you see, it's a very rigorous, well-structured, but it takes time. So you see, you have at least 3 workshops, and you have in between the cost-benefit analysis and assessments that you need. And we also do it by including field work and doing, let's say, a similar approach with farmer groups when we look into the barriers and opportunities, because it's very important that we do not come up with CSA portfolios that then simply that's just not possible because there's a very clear barrier at the community level to implement it. Okay, so we did this in several countries I mentioned. So I think it's, I'm not sure if it's complete, but I think it's around 10 countries where we implemented this approach. Some of them are in the region, a few ones in the Caribbean, Guyana and Jamaica, but also in Central America, South America, and then in Asia and also in Africa. So we have done this approach, and you can go into our webpage, Alliance Biodiversity SEAT, and you can go to stories, and then you can find the different stories from different, I've just put here 2 examples, the one from Guyana and the one from Jamaica. And they can also recommend you, there's a very nice video on the Jamaica one. So you can watch it after, I will not show it now because it's a little bit too long, but you can watch it maybe after this webinar later. And you can find it in the blog when you go to the story, or just use the link. We can then maybe just post it in the comments section of the webinar. So how does it actually work? If you look at more like in a graphical way, so we brought together in these projects in Guyana and Jamaica the climate smart agriculture prioritization framework, and we combined it with the previous assessments that we do on crop modeling, so just also to understand actually the crops that these farmers are producing in our specific project area. So how strong are they impacted by climate change in the future? So you can imagine it's different for different crops. So we use models and geospatial models to analyze and to make a prediction of how strong the crop would be impacted in the future by future climate change. And we use this actually also to make this selection of the initial long list of CSA practices that we use then in the prioritization process. And we have this another framework that we also use. It's called the Climate Smart Agriculture Rapid Appraisal, which is a very good tool that you can use when you work with communities, because it's very well prepared to work with communities. So you have here, you work on gender norms and dynamics, you do a value chain characterization, and then you talk with communities about what are the key risks for implementation of the CSA practices from their side. Because you can imagine that you have the stakeholders at the national level from the ministries, they have good ideas what type of CSA practices could be implemented. But then if you talk to the farmers, you can see then, okay, what are the real barriers that they would face implementing a specific practice. So it's very important to have them in this framework or in this approach, just to be sure that you're not coming with a very strong top-down approach where you just come up with the practices that farmers should implement, and then I think you all know that from your own experience, then it's not very likely that it's going to work. So you need to include them, and we try to do that in these exercises. And it's always a very good learning also for us scientists when we do that. And then once we have done this, let's say these 3 big work packages, we have also a lot of producing materials like policy briefs, where we are very specific to the policy level. What can they do or what should they do? But we also produce, in the case of Jamaica, we produced very nice manuals for the farmer communities together with the University of West Indies in Jamaica. They helped us to produce real manuals about these practices, so it can be then very specific for farmers what they can do or what they need to do and how they do it. Okay, so you see here also what Miguel mentioned. So we have this toolbox. So we have these tools, and we go to a national when we come to a new country, we use this toolbox or this suitcase, and we do just what I just mentioned before. We look at first, we do this assessment, look at the production systems. We go in stages so that we make sure that we don't forget, and we can really be very, very rigorous and very structured about how we prioritize and how we select these practices. We take into account the environment or the climate situation. And so I mentioned before also we do geospatial modeling, and then we have these practices or these portfolios of practices that we use then to formulate our policy briefs and our guidance for implementing these practices. So in the case of Jamaica, we had 3 communities where we worked. It's in the south of Jamaica and the southern plains, where a lot of agriculture, a lot of food production. I think they call it the agriculture food basket of Jamaica. So there was a high diversity of crops. They had one in common. All these crops they depend on water and on irrigation, because so our project was embedded into a bigger project where they're working on bringing irrigation to farmers, because it's a very dry area and it's getting drier. So very important to have. So they selected on the right side. You can see like what are the portfolios that they came up with. So very important, integrated soil management, because they need to keep moisture in the soil even when there are longer dry periods. In the video, you can see very nice examples how they actually do it, keeping moisture in the soil. So you need to have a sustainable water management, because in the case of the southern plains of Jamaica, they're currently carrying water tanks or water on trucks to the farms when there is need, when it's too dry, and this is not very sustainable. So they need to think about how they can improve using more sustainable irrigation, like drip irrigation and other ways of how they can get water to the plants when they need it. So they are all aware of working on diversification, integrated pest and disease management, and also there's also always so the need to have the right supplies and processing facilities after harvesting at hand. And this is sometimes in some areas a problem. So they are far away, or they are not. This is something also they work together with the ministry to getting these processing stations and this post-processing facilities. Okay, so from our side, we use, and this is free to use, so you can find it when you go to our webpage. So we use tools. Often it's just very simple Excel tools that you can use for calculating indicators or doing cost-benefit analysis. Sometimes it's other tools, but all these tools that we produce, they are open source. So we share them with our stakeholders when we finalize the project, so that they stay with our national partners, and then they can do it also in other areas. And normally we also include a training component, or we work together with consultants from the country to have them integrated into the cost-benefit analysis, for example, or into the crop modeling we did in Guyana. We had students coming to our center and learning how to do the crop modeling and so on. So there's a capacity building component also always integrated in this type of activities. Here you can just see what types of indicators we use for the different CSA pillars. Just an example here, you can see, like, to look at productivity and food security, you would look at very typical ones like what is the post-harvest loss, what is the yield, income generation. But when it goes to adaptation, it's like efficient use of water, soil, how communities manage climate risk, or how climate risk is managed by a specific practice, diversification of income, gender. And then by mitigation, there are obviously, when we talk about smallholders, it's always very difficult to talk about mitigation, but it's important that the CSA practices that we include, they have also a component of mitigation. Like, for example, improving, if you talk about agroforestry, you would improve biomass, soil carbon stock, but also when it's just crops, nutrition, efficient use of nutrition is also already a good way of having a mitigation component in it. And then you can see, for example, from Jamaica, at the end of the day, you get a very clear list, in this case, 8 portfolios that were selected for the Parnassus community, for pumpkin, pepper, Irish potato, and sweet potato. So they have combinations of water efficient irrigation, drip irrigation, raised beds, and so on. So there's combinations of specific practices. And for all of these packages, we calculated the different cost benefit indicators, or for example, what is the payback period when farmers implemented, what is the cost of the practice per acre, and so on. And then we have the indicators for the CSA pillars: food security, adaptation, and mitigation. And finally, barriers and opportunities. You can see you get a very clear, well-structured ranking or prioritization of your CSA options. And then in our last workshop, we always work with the stakeholders on what are the next steps, or what should they do now with these portfolios. And there's obviously always a how, what, who, and when, and we define very concrete. So what's the action plan actually to get the CSA package or the CSA portfolio implemented? Obviously, it's also a very good input for possible financing mechanisms, so like Green Climate Fund or the development banks. They like to see this very clear, prepared portfolios ready for investment. So this is basically what comes out. So, and then finally, we produce this type of publications that can be used for decision making on the country level, like policy briefs, but also more detailed reports, technical reports. And then, as I mentioned before, for Jamaica, we did this extension manuals for the 3 communities. Yeah, I will stop here and give back to the audience. I think Daisy will do the next one.
I think you're muted, Daisy.
Yeah, now I'm here.
Yes, perfect. We can hear you now.
Share my screen.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you see my screen now?
Yep, we can see it.
Perfect. So yeah, thank you very much, and I'm really very happy to be here with you today. So I'm going to share a very specific example. There are many, and you already see many examples of how we have been using science to inform decision making at different levels. But now I'm going to share about how we have been working with the financial sector in one example. So first, as you know, there are at the global scale and also regional, there have been some funds, impact investment funds that are coming up because they are trying to focus and channelize funding towards resilience, towards biodiversity, and all these more nature-based solutions that we need actually to be implemented at a scale so that we can really move the needle towards more sustainable food, agri-food systems. And that's something that we want to contribute in terms of the science that we produce. So in Latin America, there was this adaptation fund that was focusing on smallholders across Latin America in different countries and trying to support their adaptation to climate change and climate variability. And it was focused in trying to work with microfinance institutions so that they could actually access to different funds so that they could loan or put some financial products to smallholder farmers that were going to implement climate smart agriculture practices and technologies in their farms. So the idea was that this fund could direct funds to those microfinance institutions to allow them to loan, to provide access to funds to the smallholder farmers so they could increase their resilience. So this investment fund, they were focusing in Latin America, but we didn't study in Honduras, Ecuador, El Salvador, and Guatemala. The idea was to target indicators that would demonstrate impact on productivity and adaptation, focusing on a small-scale agriculture, so very, very small-scale agriculture in terms, because those are the most vulnerable ones. The investment size was $32 million, and our contribution from the CGIAR, specifically the Alliance of Biodiversity and CIAD, was to provide technical assistance. So one of the key elements that we assessed also was that the microfinance institutions don't usually have in their portfolio financial products that address climate change mitigation and adaptation, specifically adaptation in this case. And also that they could potentially develop and prioritize portfolios that could be financed through them so that they could benefit farmers from Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador, and Ecuador. So what we did was to gather the resources that we have in terms of methodologies, frameworks, as the one that you have seen presented by Miguel and Anton, so that we could help the fund to work with the microfinance institutions to develop those kind of portfolios. And also assess how would be kind of the financial mechanisms to put those portfolio practices into the portfolio of the microfinance institutions. And how we did that with working with key microfinance institutions in those countries, together with Add Value. Add Value is the one that is putting the fund together so that they could leverage those fundings, that funding from the large investors towards that specific fund on adaptation. So the process that you are seeing now is very similar to the one that we have been listening from Miguel and Anton. So we focus on working on the field data collection, so that we actually have specific information that is tailored to understand what is the vulnerability of the different smallholder farmers in specific locations, and also understanding how the microfinance institutions work, so that we actually develop strategies and the portfolios that we develop are targeting the way that microfinance institutions work, so that it is a feasible product. Then we did data analysis. We analyzed the climate vulnerabilities, the potential negative effects on productivity, on income, and on losses in terms of crop and also animal production, and did the prioritization. We did the prioritization of adaptation options. Then, based on that, we designed the portfolios so that we have the climate threats. Then we have the effect that those climate threats will have in the different crops, production systems. Then based on that, we said, okay, if those would be the effects of the climate threat in those production systems, what are the combination and the portfolio of practices that we will need to address those? And then assess the potential benefits that the implementation of those practices in that specific system will have in terms of income, again, income, productivity, and losses. And then we know that that's very important, because we need to know what are the options that we will need to put in place so that we address those climate threats. But then we need also to have an economic analysis so that we know what are the costs, what are the different macroeconomic indicators that will tell us if that investment will have some return in terms of the funds that we are putting there. And we assess more the critical financial indicators to understand what is the viability of the implementation of those portfolios. And because we need to make sure that the different portfolios are contributing to the indicators in terms of resilience and adaptation and also productivity, and also aligned to the Sustainable Development Goals, we design a monitoring and evaluation framework that will be carried out by the microfinance institutions, but also some technical partners that will be on the ground, and those different institutional arrangements that need to take place so that that monitoring framework can be implemented. But one of the characteristics of that monitoring and evaluation framework is that we did a very basic framework, so that it was very easy, low tech, but very robust in terms of the methodology. And then one that can include different tools if their resources are available to do a more technological monitoring and evaluation of the practices that are being implemented, so that we are sure that they are contributing to the resilience and adaptation indicators, and also to the Sustainable Development Goals. So this is the process, and is based on the different methodologies that we have seen today and others as well. And now what we have in terms of the results. So we understood what were the composition of the different system production systems in the different countries. We knew what were the type of smallholder agriculture that we had in those countries, also because through the microfinance institutions, they are located in the rural areas as well. So they actually know very well what are the dynamics in terms of the agricultural sector. We also assessed the different adaptation measures, how they would fit in different countries, the type of measures we have from infrastructure to management, and also some of those are in both categories. We also assess what is the loan portfolio size in each one of the countries, in the different microfinance institutions that we work with, and also some characteristics in terms of the farmers, the smallholder farmers that are located in those countries. So that information was very useful to actually do the assessment of the portfolios. And here is an example, a specific example of what I was mentioning in terms of the development of the CSA, Climate Smart Agriculture portfolios for Guatemala. So you have the climate threats, the effects that you will have from those climate threats. So in this case, we are looking at coffee in Guatemala. Climate threats is diseases due to climate changes and winds. We also have the effect in terms of the fruit loss and branch breaking, increase of disease that are present in the crop, and this will lead to decrease in yields. Then we developed some measures that could address those threats. So fast growing the light fences, organic input production, shade management, and assess how would be the effects in yield, income, and also avoided losses. That give us the portfolio of practices. So we have in this case for coffee, three main practices. And for each one of those, we did the cost, the initial cost of the practice, the net present value, the internal rate of return, payback period, and the incremental net income. So with all of that information, we can actually put some indication of what will be the financial product and mechanism to implement those practices, and how will the microfinance institution will be able to loan the smallholder farmers resources to implement them. And then on here you will see the M&E, the monitoring and evaluation framework that we put. So the basic scenario, as I mentioned, for each one of the measures, we put what is the minimum monitoring that you can do to assess whether these practices are contributing to the different indicators. And then the optimal scenario using more systematic monitoring and evaluation methods. So, for example, you would need more, perhaps, technical experts going into the field. So it will have more costs, or we can use also more digital tools or drones or other elements in that optimal scenario to do the monitoring and evaluation. The idea of these two scenarios is that at least we have the minimum way to monitor the progress of the different options. And we also did an analysis of the different adaptation measures in terms of the internal rate of return. And here, for example, we see that all options are profitable. Infrastructure options, the internal rate of return of these infrastructure options are enough to cover the loan and the additional costs that are related to those practices. Irrigation options are, the rate of irrigation options are over 50%, indicating high profitability when implemented, mainly due to the increase of efficiency in the water use, because as you reduce the cost of the water they use in the production system. And also we assess all the management options that some of them have also a high internal rate of return. So and we did this analysis for the different countries so that we could have an idea of actually investing in this kind of portfolios have also high profitability. And I would like to finalize with some key messages. So this specific example, very, very quickly that I shared, it shows how science can actually bring the gap between sustainability and profitability to achieve sustainable and climate smart agriculture. Working together with financial institutions is key because the financial institutions have the tools to promote sustainable and climate smart agriculture. They understand very well the risks that producers face, and they have also different ways to understand what should be the measures to mitigate those risks. And we, from the side of the science, we can actually provide some inputs for those for development different kinds of financial mechanisms, products, so that we can integrate climate change adaptation mitigation into those mechanisms. And this is a way to achieve impact at scale. We really need that. We need to accelerate the pace into in the way we implement and scale climate smart agriculture, nature-based solutions, because we really need to actually move the needle towards more sustainable, resilient, and competitive agri-food systems. And we need to do it together, science and the different stakeholders, including the financial sector. So that's it for now, just to share some of the innovations that we have in the Alliance from the different areas that we work. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Daisy. Thank you, everyone, for this wonderful presentation. That was really, really insightful and really cool to get a lot of concrete examples into how this can be implemented. I think we would be now open for questions if there are any. I know that Michael Gordon had raised his hand at some point during the presentation. So Michael, if you just want to pop out your question, feel free to do so.
Yeah, hi, good afternoon, everyone.
Hi, Michael.
Actually, I have a thank you very much for today. It was pretty fascinating, I must admit. It was a lot of information, and maybe we need a little more time. Maybe we should do it in a 3 hour scope as opposed to 1.5 hours, because it was so much information. And I mean, if I could show you, these are my questions, and there are lots of them. I don't know if you can see it, but I have about 15 questions. So obviously, I can't ask all of them. But let me just tell you what my overall focus is. I'm trying in the credit union movement, we're trying to influence and support policy, particularly in the area of green entrepreneurship. And that includes agriculture and other areas. To do that, a lot of what was done today, including what was done by, is it Daisy? At the end was very helpful to me. But I was trying to look at certain things that we need to do, particularly when it comes to risk management, in terms of our clients in the areas of, for example, how do we deal with severe climate conditions? We just went through a hurricane experience here. So I don't know what you've been going, what your experience has done, or what your project has done to be able to say, okay, instead of damaging 90% of the crop, because of what we did, we only able to, we only lost 20% of the crop. So I'm trying to find out whether, in fact, the program actually dealt with those issues, and what can we do, and how can we, and maybe I need to have a conversation with you separately or something, but what can we do to help shape policy related to green entrepreneurship, influence consumer behavior, focus on green entrepreneurship. How do you deal with land misuse? Because I know one of the earlier presentation, we spoke about how the land is used and everything. But again, it's typical for our country and for many countries in the Caribbean, where land is not used in the way it's supposed to be used. So how can we develop policies that will one, guide it, and two, fix what has happened in the past? So I'm saying there are a lot of things I have to ask, and I can't go through all of it. But those are some things that kind of came out in my mind in terms of what our reality is, and what can we do to fix one, and what can we do to influence adaptation solutions. And I'll stop there for now.
I don't know who wants to jump in, but I can start. Thank you, Michael, for your question. So that's the challenge that we have, that we deal every day. So the idea is for us to do science so that we can inform the different policies, not only in the phase of formulation, but also implementation, so that they can actually use that information to adjust, no, and to create programs that support the implementation of this kind of practices and use this perspective of combining agricultural production with ecosystem services, with having more resources that we will need to actually produce in the future our food. We have developed different mechanisms. So we work together with the policymakers at the government levels in some cases. So we have advised, also work with them in the formulation of policies. But that includes policies from climate change policies, but also some policies that have to deal with the private sector, no? In a specific example, in the case of Colombia, we have now a project that involves the producers associations of the country. So, for example, we have the National Federation of Rice, the National Federation of Cereals, and in that way, we are able to not only work with the Ministry of Agriculture, but also to the producers' organizations that are also linked to the farmers and to the agribusinesses that are part of the value chain, so that they can implement the climate smart options that we all know that work and that can be used to address the climate challenges that we have. In terms of land use, for example, you were mentioning, the idea is that those different, the research that we do inform what would be the implications of continuing with the land use that is currently in place, and what would be the changes needed to do that. But we could do that, and we are able to do that with local partners, no? With the key institutions in the different countries that want to work together, and we develop a way to actually assess what is happening in each country. And with the information that we have, we can also develop those kind of analysis.
So let me just clarify one side here. So part of your program is supporting institutional strengthening of some partners within the sector. Is that correct?
Yeah. So the way that we work is that we have projects. No, we apply to different projects from international cooperation, multilateral funding, and so on, so that we, together with the local institutions, we put together a proposal, and in which we include capacity strengthening of the local institutions, because for me, that's key. If we are going to do something in a country, we need to strengthen the capacity of the local partners or the local institutions, because at the end, we are going to move to another project, no? But the capacity needs to stay in the country, so that they can actually develop more processes around that. So that's the way that we work.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you very much for that answer.
Are there any other questions? Yeah, Giselle, you go ahead.
Benedict, we were supposed to have a talk privately, but we'll deal with that after. But I have just to follow up on Michael's questions. So the major benefit that Eco-Micro Scale for Resilience would offer to us as partners would be to assist with projects and, as you said, capacity strengthening.
The Eco, Micro, and Scale for Resilience initiative in the Caribbean right now is mostly focused on knowledge sharing and building the ecosystem for adaptive capacity, adaptive finance in the Caribbean at the moment. And so through this right now, we have our partners, the Alliance of Biodiversity and CIAT, as well as GAVA Capital. We created Scale for Resilience together. And so the idea of this initiative is to kind of bring in the knowledge necessary and the support necessary in order for you guys to be able to implement these types of financial products in your institutions. And part of that is through these webinars and through these like information sharing, these knowledge products, so that you have a little bit more of like background knowledge or capacity to, take this knowledge and then sort of implement it in your institutions. But also more than happy to provide like one-on-one support. If you do need calls to kind of have a little bit of a better idea or more like deep dive into what that could look like concretely in your institution, then that is also possible. But that is sort of what the Eco Micro Scale for Resilience initiative is focusing on. It's really, knowledge information, knowledge sharing, but also building the network in the Caribbean so that you as financial institutions can share also best practices between yourselves as well.
Okay, totally understand. So probably you can aid in sharing information with us in terms of where we could get funding to assist with these initiatives then.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, the webinar that's going to be focusing on next week is focusing on the investor perspective and where the current funding is coming from, how you can access funding. The last webinar that we had was also focusing on capacity building and the operationalization of resilience finance in your institution. And that's exactly what investors want to see when they're looking at if they're going to provide funding or not. They want to see that you have the operational capacity, the monitoring and evaluation capacity to be able to implement these kinds of projects. So also, yeah, that is a way that you can also benefit through the initiative for sure.
Okay, thank
Policy
you.
as well. And,
Yes,
and the
and
underlying
policy.
policy associated with it. Okay, yeah. Because I as I said, a lot of what I said today was had me just writing all morning, and
Mhm.
I was very intrigued about what the impact of the Jamaican and Guyana experience, and I'll take a look at it. That was just sent there. But I'm sure I'm going to have questions after I go through it, but it's okay. And then we spoke about the economic analysis, and it's one of the areas where I find it's very important, particularly when you're talking about climate adaptation. And I don't think we give enough attention to it. I think it's something that we really need to we need to provide more knowledge on that area, which is why I'm saying that alone will take an entire session, I believe, because helping people understand, helping people understand what is the true investment, what are the true costs, and therefore what are the true return. I think it's something that we need to make sure that is internalized by anybody participating in programs like this, particularly financial institutions and particularly developmental financial institutions. And so I was just wondering in terms of the economic analysis whether I'll be able to get more information about that. That's one. And then the other thing I wanted to ask about before I cut off is, let me just leave that one question. I'll probably send you an email, Benedict, with all the other questions I have. If you could get clarification from the others, please. So you could give me some information about the economic analysis that is done and how we can get more information to help us internalize that as part of our evaluation process.
Yeah, I can jump in and perhaps Miguel can add, but it is a cost benefit analysis. I mean, it's not, you have to put together what are the costs of in investing in that practices, what would you need, depending the location, depending where you are, depending on the characteristics of the different practices. Then you will have to assess the period, the different macroeconomic, the different financial indicators that you will need to understand, okay, what would that mean in a period of time when that practice, those portfolio of practices will increase my productivity so that I can have an additional income to not only pay the loan, but also to start, growing, increasing the production or those kind of things. That in terms of the economic part of it. But we also assess what are the environmental and the social benefits from those practices, because you need to also assess whether you will be able to increase the biodiversity that you have, or the ecosystem services that you have in your farm or in your in your community, based on the implementation of the different practices across the different farms. So that's something that is also valuable when you are investing in climate adaptation, and especially in those kind of funds, that we are looking at those different indicators. I don't know if you want to add something.
I won't ask any more questions. I already dominated. My apologies for that.
We like
but,
questions, not a problem. But yes, Michael, feel free to send your questions by mail, and I or our colleagues are more than happy to answer them. Also, I mean that's what we're here for. We're here to kind of
Okay.
try and build capacity and give more knowledge where we can. So if ever you do have any questions, just feel free to send them per email. It's not a problem.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you.
No worries.
Thank you all. Yeah. Mhm.
So we are about at the end of the webinar. If there aren't any other questions, then I think I will close this up with a couple of closing remarks. Just to let you know that as I mentioned before, we do have our last webinar next Friday at the same time. We did take into account your feedback from the survey that you filled out from the last webinar, and we shortened this last webinar on the investor's perspective. That's only going to be 1 hour. So we're not going to take so much of your time this next week. And it'll be focusing more on, a roundtable. It'll be a little bit more interactive on what investors are looking for when it comes to, adaptive finance and where the funding is mostly coming from. And that will be the end of the webinar series. And we're also in the process now of organizing our half-day Caribbean Resilience Finance Day event, which will be a half-day virtual event. You'll probably be getting more information on that within the next weeks. And yeah, as I said, if you do have any questions, any uncertainties, if you want to have one-to-one calls, really don't hesitate to reach out. We're here to help and we're happy to help however we can. So yeah, with that, I would just like to thank everyone for participating. I'm really happy with the amount of people that were here. And wishing you a good rest of your Friday and a good start to the weekend. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.